This is the continued story of the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin, as retold to the children of the Watertown SDA Church Primary Sabbath School. I'm your storyteller, Austin Bacchus. Let's go. Chapter 12, Conquering the Cuckoo-Cuckoos. The very name Cuckoo-Cuckoo caused trembling lips among the western Papuan tribesmen. Government patrol officers can testify that while on patrol, they often have difficulty keeping their hired carriers working for them if they happen to see the foot tracks of the Cuckoo-Cuckoo tribe. These savage little people are the Pygmies of New Guinea. Now, as far as I was able to tell, they are not cannibals. Rather, they just kill for the sake of killing. Murder seems to be woven into the very fabric of their customs and superstitions. To the Cuckoo-Cuckoos, a man has not proven himself to be a man unless he has taken a life. And the more lives he takes, the better a man he is. When a Cuckoo-Cuckoo warrior presents his chief with a freshly killed human head from another language area of New Guinea, he's immediately given a hornbill feather, which is a rare bird in New Guinea, to place in his fuzzy hair. And I have seen many Cuckoo-Cuckoos with so many feathers that you couldn't even see the hair on their head. The instinct to kill is so deeply embedded in their way of life that their young women will have nothing to do with a man who doesn't have hornbill feathers. The more feathers a young man wears, then the more eligible he becomes for a woman to marry him. These savage people are deadly with their bows and arrows. I wouldn't give them a shot at me at 500 yards if I could avoid it. I've seen them draw an arrow and quickly fire at a little bird the size of a sparrow 100 feet up in the sky. And every time they shoot, the little bird falls to the ground. The Cuckoo-Cuckoos use poison arrows against their enemies, but never in search of food. There are two ways at least by which they poison their arrows. One is by the combined sap of certain trees and vines, and the other is by putting the arrowhead into the rotting corpse of a human, getting all sorts of bacteria on it, and when you get hit with an arrow like that, you will die from bad infection. Both methods cause violent deaths within a few days. Their arrowheads are often tipped with human bone or bone from the cassowary, which is a large bird related to the ostrich, and they're carved so they have a hollow point. The poison is put in the hollow, and then the bone is lightly glued to the tip of their arrow. The only way to get the arrow out is to push it through the victim, and if you try to pull it out, you're just going to leave that little piece of poison bone inside. So generally, if you get a scratch from a poison arrow from a Cuckoo-Cuckoo, you'll be dead within a few days. Strange and varied are the customs of the Cuckoo-Cuckoos. The Cuckoo-Cuckoos are nomads who seldom establish a village. Instead, they live in makeshift huts comprised of a few sheets of bark just leaning against a tree or a log. They plant a garden and move on, knowing exactly when to return to reap their produce. Because of their constant fear of headhunting raids from other language areas, the men keep awake all night to guard the settlement, and then they sleep during the daylight hours while the women plant the gardens. Before my first visit among these people, I prayed and prayed much, asking the Master to prepare the way. The trip was carefully planned for the time when the fish were in the river's headwaters for the spawning season. The tribespeople can tell when the fish are coming up the rivers from the sea, and they travel to the river edges. When the news spread around the campus that the boat would be leaving within a few days for the headwaters of the Vailala River, right at the fringe of the Cuckoo-Cuckoo country, the crew began to come to me one by one with many unexpected reasons that they couldn't go on this trip. One said, "Oh, Master, you know I am due for my holiday. I'd like to take vacation now." Another said, "Oh, my wife's mother is sick. I shouldn't be away right now." I understood, for they had grown up all fearful of the dreaded Cuckoo-Cuckoos. However, I did not have any real difficulty in getting sufficient help to man the boat. I had with me my right-hand man, Pastor Paul Jama. He was a Solomon Islander. He was a man who had no fear in him. After traveling up the Vailala some days, we entered a tributary, the Ivory River. In a little while, we knew we were in Cuckoo-Cuckoo country because we could see these little people darting from tree to tree. Sometimes all that we could see was just the tip of an arrow protruding from behind the trunk of a tree. Gradually, we reached an area where there were clearings that we could tell gardens had been planted. I asked the men to drop anchor so we could go ashore. In unison, they tried to assure me they knew there were no Cuckoo-Cuckoos here. Needless to say, they did not know because neither they nor I had been here before. My orders were to stop, drop anchor, and lower our dinghy boat. Never before have I had such an energetic crew. They all decided, we must stay on the boat to wash the decks and polish the engine and, just clean everything. Pastor Paul and I rowed in the dinghy to the riverbank while the others stayed behind. He was a true soldier of the cross and was always ready for adventure. I only knew one word of the Cuckoo-Cuckoo language. The word was miraki, which means come. So stepping from the dinghy and climbing up the riverbank, I began to call, "Miraki! Miraki!" until it was almost hoarse. But they didn't Miraki. I began to wonder whether the boys were right in saying there were no cuckoos there. Then suddenly we were surprised to see a young warrior walk out along a fallen tree that had come to rest some 10 or 12 feet above the ground. He had his arrow aimed directly at us. We were amazed when he answered in the Motuan language, the language that we spoke in the mission station. "What do you want?" "We are friends. We've come to heal your sick and show you a new way of life." "You are not our friends. You are our enemies." I had difficulty convincing the young warrior that we were friends and we'd come to help them. But when I at last got it across to him, he called out, "Miraki!" And his comrades came from everywhere. We had been surrounded. We just hadn't spotted them. How did this young man know the Motuan language? Oh, apparently as a small boy he had been taken to the coast and been sold in exchange for a large bush knife. He had grown up among the Motuan-speaking people, but on reaching manhood he ran away one night and rejoined his people and had to learn his own language again. The young warrior became my able interpreter. Motuan was actually his mother tongue. Pastor Paul and I ministered to the cuckoo's many medical needs. I treated some shocking cases of bad skin infections and ulcers and boils. I extracted some teeth, and Pastor Paul showed them pictures from a picture roll. At last, when all their medical needs were met, we asked them to sit on the ground. As simply as I could, I told them the story of Calvary. While I was talking, Pastor Paul found pictures to illustrate the work of the great physician. The old chief, a man all covered with pig grease, kept jumping to his feet and talking excitedly to his people. Then he would sit down for a few minutes while my interpreter and I continued the story, but he interrupted us again and again. When I felt that we had preached more than they could possibly absorb, I told him we would have to bid them farewell. The old chief came over and hugged me until all my white clothes were the color of pig grease, and told me that I would not be saying farewell because I was their chief now. This was the highest possible honor they could bestow upon me. Fearful of the consequences, I tried to decline by saying that many days away my wife and children were waiting for the day when I would come home again. There seemed to be a lot of excitement, but I was absorbed in talking to the chief through my interpreter. The chief then impatiently took my arm and said, "Take your pick." He had a line of women stretching out next to the riverbank. He was asking me to pick a new wife so I could stay with them. Knowing I had to be very careful how to handle the situation, I told him I wouldn't know which one to choose. He replied, "It need not be one wife. You can have many wives if you like." Now, this was the second highest honor that they could give me. I tried to explain I couldn't be their chief, and I couldn't take any of their women for a wife, and immediately they all got angry. They picked up their arrows. They began scratching their skin and putting their blood on the arrows, the last act before they take a life. You have to think quickly in this situation, or you may not have the chance to think again. I spoke just one word. That was the name of Jesus, a name they had never heard before that day. Immediately, the warriors laid down their bows and arrows and spears side by side on the ground, a sign among primitive people that they want to make peace. What power there is in the name of Jesus, power even you and I know little about. The laying down of their weapons gave me an opportunity to explain my reasons for not being their chief and why I couldn't take a wife from among their people. But I promised I would return. The old chief asked, "How do we know your promise is true?" I said, "My promise is true. I will return. I will come again." "All right, then, we will give you a gift." I knew this way of sealing a contract. It often takes time for them to give a gift because they're going to trek out to their gardens way out in the jungle to bring back pineapples or bananas. I was very eager to get into my boat and get back to sheltered waters because a storm was looming over the ridge of mountains nearby. I tried to explain I wouldn't be able to accept their gift, but I promised I would return again. The chief shook his head and said, "If you will not take our gift, then you are an untruthful man." And the air was tense with excitement, for I had added insult upon insult by refusing the two highest honors they could give me, and now refusing their gift too. Again and again, spears and arrows were picked up and pointed at us. But again I spoke the name of Jesus. Immediately they laid their weapons aside to make peace. I told them that I would take their gift, but I urged them to be as quick as possible because the storm could burst any minute. Pastor Paul and I returned to the boat, but we were somewhat concerned to hear a lot of wailing among the people we had left. Going back to the riverbank, I called out to my interpreter that if their gift was not given willingly, I would have nothing to do with it. His reply was, "It's all right, Master. We are bringing our gift now." You could never guess what the gift was. 2 little boys, one age 7 and the other age 9. The last 2 with royal blood flowing through their veins, the sons of the chief. The old chief made a flowery speech. Tears ran down his dirty old face. My interpreter told me the chief was telling the boys that he was no longer their chief. They were to render to me the same obedience as they had to him. I was perplexed. I couldn't speak their language. They couldn't speak mine. But I couldn't afford to insult the tribe any further. Therefore I thanked the old chief profusely and sailed away with my 2 new little boys. We had scarcely started downstream when the roar of the storm coming over the mountains could be heard. Torrents of water began pouring down on the mountains close by. We were barely out of the Ivori River when whole trees came washing down these rivers out into the Vailala River to go to the ocean. The crew adopted the little boys wholeheartedly, and in a matter of days had them talking reasonably well in the Matuan language. They would get a cup of water when they knew the little fellows were thirsty, and they would offer to them, saying, "Ranu," the Matuan word for water. When the boys would reach for the water, they would take back the cup and say, "Ranu, Ranu." And when the boys tried to say "Ranu," then they would give them the water. The same thing was done with food, and within hours they knew how to ask for food or water. The whole story was nothing short of an amazing answer to prayer. We had been led to perhaps the only person among the thousands of cuckoos who could speak the language in which we worked. Arriving at our mission station some days later, I announced to my wife and children, we had 2 new members of the family. The little cuckoos, we named them Caleb and Joshua from the Promised Land, became an integral part of our household. Be sure to tune in next time for more stories from the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin. And meanwhile, feel free to check out these videos as well as others on my YouTube channel with many more mission and Bible stories for kids and adults. God bless you.